Okay, who's hosting this all today? Hosting team of 3. We're all located at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, part of the work that's united on the topic of JUSTRA Cities Network. So we are a theme-driven network. So we do theme-driven network and research across different projects and peoples and organizations. So we try to connect to very different organizations out there, all focusing on just sustainability transitions. And what we ourselves do is also networking activities. So we have a publication series, an event series, which this one is one of it. We do all sorts of social media. I wanted to especially highlight that LinkedIn kicked us out of our old group. So if you have been part of that, please rejoin it. We had to come up with a new one. And we have a rather active mailing list. So if you're not part of that yet, that's would be a nice way to get involved. We are also doing a number of research activities and actually really starting off our research on translocal networking now. There was an event already in the beginning of the year on translocal solidarity that was kind of a kickstart toward it. And today we would like to look with you, also co-create this first phase of our research, this database of translocal networks. So those who contribute to just sustainability transitions, co-develop a research agenda together with networks in the next month, and also start research collaborations with those who are interested. Especially what is marked today, and which I also like as a kind of a celebration moment, is that we're relaunching the Wiki on Sustainable and Just Cities. It's a wiki that has been conceived as one under one of the EU-funded projects. It's called Urbana, the urban community of practice on sustainable and just cities. So they have launched it already a few years ago, and we have now relaunched it, reordered it a bit, and will be keeping it updated for the time to come. So the aim is really to share actionable and accessible knowledge to practitioners, city makers, and researchers across different topics that all relate to sustainable and just cities. And today, specifically focusing on kind of launching this database and getting it kind of started, the database of translocal networks. Before we get all into the wiki, we're going to have a first part of our program today, have a panel discussion with a plenary Q&A, for which we have magnificent guests waiting to share their stories and their research and their actions. Then we have a small break, and then we go into breakout groups and do hands-on wiki work. Okay. Our panel today, who is with us? So we have Corinna Hulsel with us. She's done research on especially community-led housing in Europe, and she's going to be sharing her research on that. We have Witte Boho-Markele from South Africa, and she is the program manager at the South African Cities Network, looking into the governance for just sustainability in cities for us. And we have Duncan Crowley from the Ecovisa Network, looking into community-led network responses to climate emergencies. And the whole event is also being recorded, not only in tone, but also in image by Menna, Marlin Bellen, and she will be sharing her graphic harvest at the end of the workshop with us. Before we start with Corinna, so she can already get started, we're going to have a short group picture moment. So I'm going to unshare slides, and before Corinna shares, we're going to all have a big smile. Corinna, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Yes, I'm Corinna. I'm an urban geographer from Berlin, from Humboldt University. And yes, thank you very much for being here. I will talk about the role of translocal networks for the spreading of community-led housing in Europe, and give you some practical insights in my research and in my case studies. In my research, I'm particularly interested in the spreading of community-led housing that we can observe over the last 1 or 2 decades, and particularly in the role that networks at different scales play in that context. So, okay, first of all, what is community-led housing? Community-led housing is an umbrella term for housing models which involve residents and communities having central roles in the development and management of housing. Considering the current housing crisis in my research, I'm particularly interested in community-led housing models that focus on long-term affordability and on wider social benefits. In this regard, the term housing commons is one that I commonly use. Housing commons are anti-speculative properties characterized by long-term affordability and set up, organized, and managed by an ideally heterogeneous group of commoners under the principle of solidarity and participation. Some examples for housing commons and community-led housing are cooperatives, community land trusts, and the so-called Mietshäuser-Syndikat, which is mostly common in Germany. In the following, I will shortly present you these three examples or translocal networks related to these examples. The Mietshäuser-Syndikat is a cooperative-like amalgamation of self-organized housing initiatives that purchase, self-manage, and jointly occupy houses, and can mostly be found in Germany. The model was founded in 1992 in the south of Germany. And so far, we have around 180 housing projects with some 4,500 tenants implemented in Germany. The main characteristics of the Mietshäuser-Syndikat is long-term decommodification and collectivization of land and flats, which works via shared ownership structures between the National Umbrella Association of the Mietshäuser-Syndikat and the single housing projects. Further principles are horizontal decision-making structures and solidarity between ongoing and new projects. This works especially via knowledge transfer, which is mostly voluntarily done. This sketch illustrates the international circulation or spreading of this model. The blue circles is where you find the Syndikat model today, of course, mostly in Germany, but you can also see that there are some first projects in Austria, in France, in the Netherlands, and also first project in the Czech Republic. In purple, you see some further contacts to initiatives and organizations in these and other countries. So also in contacts to Spain, and also contacts in to Southeast European countries. Well, the second example, actually, I will explain to you. And in green, there are some examples of international interested initiatives. And furthermore, the triangles in the blue circle, they stand for newly created parallel structures that have been, well, established meanwhile. Among others, in Germany, there was a Syndikat for agricultural areas and farms established. We also have a foundation now, which was established to accept potential endowments and come into inheritances. And there are also regional spin-offs that often try to reduce the requirements in terms of self-organization for new housing projects. And lastly, the black points refer to the regional coordination, which is very important because, as I said, the knowledge transfer is mostly done voluntarily and organized at regional level. My second example is a network of pioneering housing cooperatives or cooperative initiatives from Central and Southeastern Europe, which is called MOBA. It's initiatives from Serbia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovenia, and Croatia, which are working together for a few years now. And they all face similar challenging framework conditions like super home ownership in these countries, the lack of regulatory frameworks and institutions for rental and cooperative housing, and also housing finance is only available for individual ownership. Because of these conditions, they started working together, and in 2020 they created the MOBA European Cooperative Society, which is, well, we can say a cooperative of cooperatives. The MOBA network works by regular member meetings, and participation at international housing events are very common. Events like the Social Housing Forum that took place in Helsinki this year, for instance. And an important part do play NGOs like World Habitat and Urban Monde, because of providing funds, and also because of knowledge transfer. The goals for the MOBA network, among others, of course, for the upcoming years is to create at least one pilot project in east of the capitals. So far, there's one project in Prague and another housing project in Budapest established. And the main tool and goal for the network is the so-called MOBA Accelerator, which is a common fund based on donations, shares, and bonds that will work to provide loans to housing projects. A solution that no national funding opportunities exist, let's say. And my third example is the networks of community land trusts, where we can also observe an international spreading. Community land trusts are non-profit, democratic, community-led organizations which develop and manage affordable homes. And another important principle of community land trusts is community organizing and capacity building. Most community land trusts exist in the US, where the model was also established in the 1960s. There are around 280 CLTs today with 15,000 homes. And in England and Wales, we have around 550 CLTs today with 1,100 completed homes. And there are further CLTs in Canada, in Australia, in Kenya, Puerto Rico, for instance. Brussels was the first city in European mainland which started to establish a CLT, which was in 2008. And today there are CLT Brussels provides over 7 projects with 100 completed homes and 5 further projects with 50 homes under construction. And there are also CLTs established in Ghent and Leuven now. Germany, the Netherlands, Ireland, Scotland, and Spain are further examples where CLTs and first housing units are under development. However, somehow similar to the second example, there are barriers at policy, financial, and referring to stewardship, which led to the idea of creating a European CLT network. It was also CLT Brussels who played a pivotal role for the creation of the European CLT network. Well, they applied for funding from Interreg, and the project called Sustainable Housing for Inclusive and Cohesive Cities allowed for constant knowledge exchange, the provision of startup funds, etc., between 2017 and 2021. Partners in or members in the European CLT network are the London CLT, Stadtbodenstiftung in Berlin, Germany, partners in the Netherlands, in Belgium, French partners, the national or the CLT network for England and Wales. I hope I mentioned everybody. Well, the goal is to join forces translocally for campaigning, advocacy, and funding at EU level, and the main goal is to form a legal institution setting the conditions in the next year, and then form this legal condition. So some first findings or observations. Why are networks so important? Looking at these 3 examples, we can see that it is often about knowledge transfer, capacity building. Advocacy always plays an important role, opening up the field to establishing links to politicians, political stakeholders. There's an important bridging function via other institutions to establish contacts to funding institutions like foundations, major cooperatives, etc., and increase the visibility via invitations to international housing events. There's mutual knowledge exchange among these network members, and financial support, and establishing of trustful bonds. But we also can see that a critical size is often necessary and possible through translocal networking, for instance, to raise awareness or to apply for funds at EU level. And what I also see in my research, that new initiatives need the evidence that that what they want to do works somewhere else. So they need good practice references, and they also need to share experiences with groups who are confronted with the similar challenges. Like in South and Central Eastern Europe. To finish, how does this work? We can see that there's a very important role that transnational so-called social movement organizations play, like NGOs like Urban Monde or World Habitat, or also Cooperative Housing International, but also the contact to so-called mature associations like the Mietshäuser Syndikat is was an important partner for some projects of the MOA network, or as is Burlington CLT for the European CLT network. And also important at local level are further network and consulting institutions. Beyond these organizations, we also see that there's a strong engagement of key actors who also act individually, let's say, as mentors, as brokers, as lobbyists, and as imagineers, how to to develop further existing models and so on. And of course, open physical meetings are very important, which allow for exchange, which have a social function. And we can also see that materials and tools, like in the case of MOBA, the accelerator plays a very important role. But of course, nevertheless, the circulation always depends on local preconditions and individual capacities. What's going on, let's say, at national level and local level, if it's possible to establish new housing projects. Yeah, thank you. This was a very kind of quick overview, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great, thanks a lot, Rubina. Virtual applause. Yes. We're gonna have time for Q&A after the talks, but if you have already questions, please put them in the chat so we can pick them up later. And we don't forget about them. Just thanks, Corinna, for that overview on the developments in housing. And now we go to Ditebo Makele, sharing with us the experiences of the South African Cities Network.
Okay, thank you so much, Julia, and thanks for that presentation, Corinna. Very interesting to see what's happening in other parts of the world. So my name is Ditebo Makele. I am Program Manager, Sustainable and Resilient Cities at an organization called the South African Cities Network. And I'm thankful to Julia and her team for inviting me to this session today. I'm going to share with you the role of the South African Cities Network in conditioning cities for cooperative governance. I'm sure most of you are familiar with just this picture that shows how unequal our country is, how unequal South Africa is. It's the most unequal country in the world as of 2020, and this is from the World Bank. And this picture taken by, I think it's a photographer and an urban planner, that just shows how unequal our society is. And this is a picture of most of sub-Saharan Africa, really, at the moment. As most of you will know, that Africa is one of the most rapidly urbanizing regions in the world. And it is grappling with unmanaged inequality, poverty, inequality, but also fragmented governance capacities. So as you go from country to country in Africa, you'll find that there are different governance capacities, different government interactions with the administrative part of local government. And added to this, all these challenges, is the climate change crisis that really then exacerbates already existing challenges that African cities face. And this leads to local government officials, where the action happens really at the local government level, that they have to deal with ever increasing complexity. So when they tackle one thing, another thing comes, and these are interdependent and interconnected challenges. So the complexity is ever increasing, and there's uncertainty in decision-making. And this exacerbates the entrenched social inequalities that often then act as major barriers to communities and civil society organizations, the private sector, and everyone else that's involved in the urban to really participate in directing the transition and the future of our cities. So I'm just going to give an example of our organization and how we are helping our cities navigate these complexities, but also use the cooperative governance lens to address some of these challenges that we face. So we were established 20 years ago. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. In 2002, we were established by the mayors of the biggest cities in South Africa. So it's the 9 metropolitan cities in South Africa that the mayors decided we're going to set up a network for us as city mayors and our city officials and practitioners and city residents. There's a broader organization in South Africa called the South African Local Government Association, which represents all 247 local authorities in the country. But it was realized by the mayors of the major cities that their challenges and their intricacies and complexities that they need to manage are quite different from the other smaller towns that make part of the broader local government sphere. And so the South African Cities Network was set up by the mayors and partners, which included some government departments and other interested organizations that then set up this organization to promote good governance and management in South African cities, to enable these cities to share best practices and to have peer-to-peer knowledge exchange, but to also look at what are the specific challenges facing these major conglomerations, the economic hubs of the country, and how can we then promote learning across the cities, but also look at how these cities then encourage and enable cooperative governance and an all-of-society approach to move these cities forward towards the goals that they have set for themselves, whether it's through their long-term development strategies that they've set up, whether it's through their integrated development plans, or whether it's through their individual sustainability strategies that they've set for themselves. And so these are some of the cities that are part of the network. It's a voluntary organization. And so over the years, we started off as 9 cities. We're now down to 7 cities that are participating as part of the network. And it's really about peer-to-peer learning, about advocating for the voice of cities to be heard. We've got 3 spheres of government in South Africa. So we've got national government, provincial government, and then local government. And the network is really about advocating and enabling the voice of cities to be heard by these different spheres of government, but also by all of society and those that are ingrained in the urban fabric of the country. We've got an extensive knowledge base that we've developed over the years, and our goal was to provide evidence-based research for cities to use in decision-making to help them navigate these complexities. We enable partnerships, and we broker partnerships between our cities and different partners, whether it's development agencies, whether it's the private sector, business chambers, and certain sectors that have a big presence in our cities, whether it's with civil society organizations or academia. And then we've got program support, where we look at how we then provide the research and the tools that cities need in the different areas of work that we focus on to navigate the complexities that they are faced with. Over the years, like I mentioned, we've got an extensive knowledge database. We've got a flagship publication called the State of South African Cities Report, which we publish every 5 years. And the 5 years is coincide with the 5-year cycle of local government in the country. So every 5 years, There are new local government elections, new mayors are elected, new administrations are put in place. And so this State of Cities report is like a report card, a barometer that shows how our cities are performing, what has gone wrong in the 5 years that administrations were in place, what has gone right, what have they done well and must continue doing, and where are the opportunities in the different areas. And then we've got another publication called the State of City Finances Report, which we publish every 2 years, which really looks at the state of our city finances and recognizing that we've got different financing models for our cities in the local government space. And we're always also advocating for some reform around how cities are financed and how they are then enabled to provide services. Yes, so these kinds of flagship reports really provide the evidence base for decision makers in our cities. Now, coming to the corporative governance lens, we understand, and this is what we promote in our cities, that in order for them to succeed in what they do, in order for them to become well-governed, to become productive, to become inclusive, to become sustainable and resilient, and to use data and innovation as ways of transitioning to become more sustainable and resilient cities, at the core of that is how effective corporative governance is and an all-of-society approach. In corporative governance, we understand and we advocate that it's just interlinked and intersects with different aspects of governance, and understanding that governance is not about the government alone, and that it involves all of society. It involves different partners that have a say and that have a voice and that would like to see changes in cities happen. But that requires a well-organized and resourced and competent state to enable that collaboration, to enable those partnerships to happen. But it also requires mutual understanding, ethics, trust, and accountability. And that's something that over the past, I'd say 10 years, that our country has been really struggling with that. There's a lot of cases that are put out in the light around corruption and around breaking of trust between communities and local government. And that is something that needs to be rebuilt and assessed really on a very deeper level. And then there's aspects of the political administrative interface that needs to function properly. And also recently, there's been sort of political interference in how cities work. And that detracts city administrators and professionals and practitioners to really focus on the work that they need to do, because the politics then interfere. And this is something that our cities are very much aware of, and something that we hope in the coming years and the next political local government cycle of elections, this political culture would have matured to recognize the implications and the impacts that an unhealthy political administrative interface has on our cities, but also impacts on service delivery and how people then experience their lives in cities. But also that intergovernmental relations need to work. So I mentioned we have these different spheres of government, national, provincial, and local, and how important that relationship is so that the rest of the system can work. So I mentioned that we have this knowledge base and research work that we do, and it's really premised on these 5 programs and thematic focus areas. Well-governed cities, which focuses on urban governance that I've already mentioned, and municipal finance. We've got productive cities, which focuses on rethinking urban economies, job creation and skills development. The informal economy, like I mentioned, our cities are grappling with a lot of informality and inequality. And the township economy, I think some people might know the history of South Africa with apartheid spatial planning that had created these dormitories called townships in our context. And how do we bring that township economy into and integrated into the wider city economies, because every city has those kind of spatial configurations. And then we have inclusive cities, which focuses on the built environment, urban safety, and urban youth strategies, recognizing that the youth are quite an important partner in city development, because they'll be the leaders in the near future, and enabling them to have a voice and giving them the rights to the city is quite important in the work that we do. And then we have the Sustainable and Resilient Cities Program, which focuses on climate change adaptation, resource efficiency, and urban resilience, and there are details under each of those. And underpinning these programs is the Innovative Cities Program, which focuses on urban data intelligence, how cities can utilize data effectively for decision making, and to enable them to do that. And all of this is really premised on this approach of an all of society approach on cooperative governance and facilitating knowledge co-creation, learning and innovation through partnerships among our cities and different stakeholders. So how do we do this? Besides the research, we've got peer-to-peer learning platforms that we've established around the various themes that we have. So we've got a built environment integration task team, which brings together from the different cities the built environment professionals. So you've got transport engineers, you've got housing specialists, you've got bulk infrastructure engineers, part of this network. You've got spatial planners, urban planners in the built environment integration task team. And with all these reference groups, they meet regularly. Some meet more at regular intervals than others, like the built environment integration task team meets every month, and they have learning events where they invite experts in. Sometimes it's closed groups, depending on the need of those practitioners. Sometimes it's just talking amongst themselves, sharing amongst themselves. Sometimes they bring in experts to come and share with them. If there's a challenge that one city would like to unpack and needs help with, then they'll bring somebody to come and help. Other times it's open, where, for instance, with the City Water Managers Forum, where they'll have learning events that are open to all of society. So you'll have other actors within the urban water space coming in and sharing their insights and helping cities navigate these challenges that they have. So all of these networks have been going on since the establishment of the cities network. Some are newer than others. For instance, the City Communicators Reference Group, I think, is about only 2 years old, because we recognized that someone needs to tell positive stories about our cities. There's always negativity in the news around, oh, service delivery is poor, oh, there's service delivery protests, they're burning things, they're doing whatever, because cities are not delivering. Not recognizing there are some pockets of excellence and some good stories that can be told of how our cities are developing. So the City Communicators Reference Group was set up to counter that narrative around the negative news that were being propagated around our cities. Yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there's also very good work that's also being done by different partners, partnering with cities, and so that message needs to be communicated. So that's really, in a nutshell, what our cities do and how they work. But I can share more later in the discussion. Thank you so much. Back to you, Julia.
Great, thanks a lot, for giving us this great insight into how South African big cities are combating some of the big issues and challenges that they're facing together. Really inspiring. Thank you. Going on to our last speaker, Duncan. There you are. Yep. Please go ahead. And the first question coming in, yes, please keep them going. Also on the chat. Duncan, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Julia, and thanks very much to the Just Transition team. Very nice to be here. The speakers already, hope they can complement what's been shared already and add to it. So I'm just going to share my screen. So that should be up now. Okay, so yeah, So I'm going to talk about system change, not climate change, community-led network responses to climate emergency. I'm going to speak about the work that's going on with Ecolese and a bit about Urbana and some of the other little projects and experiments we've been working with. My name is Duncan Crowley. I'm based in Lisbon, but I'm Irish and I've been living in a few different places around the world. So just need to move this. So how do we organize ourselves to achieve our political aims? That's part of this network approach. To look at oikos, which is the old Greek word for planet Earth, we remember where we are. So the root of that has led to ecology, which is the knowledge of home, and economy, which is the management of home. So as we see recently, thankfully, people are on the streets raising their voices that we're not managing home very well. We're in a complete mess, severe climate breakdown, climate emergency, biodiversity emergency. And as I say this, the COP is currently on in Egypt and no real hope coming from there yet. But this is despite 50 years of discussions about the limits of growth, that we live in this finite system, planet Earth, and we must accept the limits or get into real bad consequences. Currently, though, we have 1.7 Earths just to keep our day-to-day running of what we call a normal world going. So the world I'm working from is looking at approach from a degrowth, trying to bring back to the limits of stable limits, permaculture and donut economics. So permaculture, Holmgren has pointed out recently the 4 scenarios that we might be in. If we keep going where we're going, this idea that the green tech will sort us and we'll keep on growing forever, or the current more popular sustainable development and green capitalism approach, that we can just somehow manage to keep living beyond our limits, which obviously is impossible. Or we've got the Mad Max, where we could complete breakdown very quickly. Hopefully we're not going to hit there, but we could. And the world I'm working in permaculture, energy descent, is about trying to bring us more gently back down to these safe limits. So sorry, now there's just different things, screens popping up. So the network age. So this thing, well, what is networks? Why should we bother about them? There's been talk about what they are for a long time, but I think really a key to this is what happened from the late 90s when we had the new communication tools, which really allowed us normal citizens to move from real just spectators to more participants in the system. So we've always had battles for trying to make the world better, from the Republican struggles of the olden days. But there was really a shift in things in 1999 with the Battle of Seattle. Friedrich Capra talked about that was the moment when that permanently changed the political landscape of globalization. New tech tools allowed networks of groups around the planet to communicate, organize, and do action. So working offline and online together to make radical change. I was part of the Intermediate Network. It was a communication space and a tool to offer voices for people to share. And this was very new. This is before social media. So people had to battle to create the infrastructure to allow the voices to share in an open, non-corporate space. And that led to then further outputs like magazines happening at climate camps and things like that, further discussing this idea of networks and how they can help us move forward. 2009, this is what the outside of the COP looked like. In Copenhagen, with the different indigenous leaders in the world that were out there having a communication space, a people's assembly, talking about where they're coming from, what's going on, what's needed. Meanwhile, behind that, the police were baton charging the Bolivian and other delegates trying to leave, including the African delegates, trying to leave to connect with this group on the outside. So this is highly political, but it's about communication spaces. In 2011, when I lived in Barcelona, part of the occupation of the squares there, the Indignados movement, and well, Karina was talking about the housing movement. It was very much a part of this, given how severe the crisis got. But how people organize, what spaces they created, and what mechanisms they use. So using the network again to break into different circles, then how those circles feed into the wider circles, then feed into the nightly assembly about how to move forward. And then that eventually led to, a few years later, we saw the Rebel Cities in Spain, and that led to another network, the Fearless Cities Network. But this was also a very amazing and very full-on, intense, lived experience. That also then, the nature of the network today is that it's in live time. So what happens here immediately can influence over there. And this is a map that was in the square of points going up as new occupations or demonstrations started happening in other places around the world. And this kind of sharing between nodal points as well. So between Athens and Greece and Barcelona, this kind of went on, this mimicking the phrase that were being used, but then also this lovely moment where we had a lifetime projection between one square, one occupied square, and another occupied square, sharing what's going on in your place, what's going on in our place. And I think if you take the idea from peer to peer, that was square to square. And it was a very beautiful moment, but it was part of that translocally. We're individually active in our place, but we're part of a wider network, fighting the same fight, trying to move forward despite the kind of local dynamics and particulars that we have to work around. So donor economics, a new interesting thing has popped up in the last few years. It's identified as the new compass to navigate us through the 21st century. Kate Raworth has done fantastic work building on other ecological science behind this to create this new, very visual process to try to go forward. It's openly post-capitalist, which is very interesting because it's calling into being the capitalism problem. I'm not going to go into it very much, but part of it is about how we distribute better, and that's all about how the network can enable better distribution of resources, communications, etc., etc. And this is interesting because this is breaking from shifting the paradigm from the old paradigms to newer ones. So the idea that economy was the rich white man in the Western world to more normal citizens become active participants in a new type of economy to make the world a better, safer place where we can all thrive, as opposed to just this needless infinite growth idea that we've become addicted to. But also offering a toolkit for local groups to make change. So from that, this is what some of them look like: making friends with people who can influence, like the Irish president who first head of state to endorse, cities starting to embrace this toolkit, and then even Time magazine saying this could actually replace capitalism. So this is the Portuguese group that I'm part of. Regenerative design, this is moving away from sustainability to full regeneration. That's working with nature in its fullest sense, as opposed to just doing little bits to be less bad. So really, and that also identifies that we've done huge damage, and we need to bring about huge fixing of the damage we've already done. So therefore, the regeneration is key to this. Part of this is working in a nested system. So you work on your small little base project. That's part of something wider. That's part of something wider. So the nested approach. In bioregionalism, then we have the map here of the rivers of Europe. I live in Lisbon. We're part of the Tejo, the Tagus, the Tajo. Lisbon and Madrid is part of the same bioregion. So we have to learn how to work together better in this kind of wider entity. But then as we go into the smaller entities, the sub-basins and the sub-basins of that, in terms of working around with the smaller tributaries of the rivers and the smaller ones beyond that. So in Lisbon, for example, the Alcantara is the major river base, as you can see there in the geographical map. And then working, understanding the wider rivers. And this is just work we're doing in the local river I live beside, the Marianas. This is an idea that I think is key as well: fractal governance, linking this kind of geographical approach. This is work done in Curitiba in Brazil that we were working on, this idea of going from the river basins to the smaller one to the smaller one, but that the idea that the smallest could form the base of an assembly, a physical assembly for local citizens to be the ones organizing and thinking and talking about, well, what sort of future do we want? And then see how that feeds into the wider level and the wider level, et cetera, et cetera. So this fractal governance approach. And when people say global to local, sometimes our sense of local is still too abstract, still too far away at the major, massive municipal level. We need to look at all the further, smaller local scales that some already are working at. A similar process to that is sociocracy, which many groups already working in regeneration are using, working at the smallest level in different circles, and then feeding it up into the circle. So from the bottom up. In Ecolese, this is the governance model that we use. How that manifests in different sort of communities around the world. This is just an example, some visually of them doing that. In Rojava in Syria, within the civil war, there's a very interesting experiment going on from the Kurdish communities. They've created a technical process which is working on this bottom-up approach. The smallest block is the street, then from there the block, and then you start going up to the bigger scales. And it has to be a feminist, anti-capitalist, and non-sectarian process in a very difficult wartime situation. Also, from the municipalities and transition network, we have Eco Neighborhood Sao Paulo. Lara Freitas and the group are doing brilliant work from transition, peace work, and also the Global Eco Village Network in terms of building models to make change and facilitate all citizens' participation in the change from that local level. From in Spain and in Barcelona with the elections in 2017, I think 16, 17, we saw this attempt to bring the infrastructure of the municipality back down into the neighborhoods, into the streets. So this is an example of like a feminist assembly in one of the local neighborhoods. So it's very interesting how to pull that and how to enable that to the greater amount of voices to participate needs things like childcare, toilets, many other things. So from translocal activism and regenerative organizing, then this is key. Wheatley's idea some years back of moving from networks to communities of practice. And that's what we're working around in Ecolese and also in Urbana. And from that, hopefully making greater systems of influence. So what we looked at was this this community practice, which had the key base of the consortium from the Urbana project, the consortium building, the consortium at the base of the 7 groups that were part of it. Then the fellows were part of it, then the wider people who participate in arenas, and then the people who participated in events and edited wikis or whatever it was. And then, so trying to have these layers of being taking ownership and responsibility for a process because you're most kind of part of it, and it's very much part of the day to day. So my work has included going and working in Brazil for some time. And I think this is also key about this translocal, about how, well, just how translocal are we going from continent to continent, from language to language is also key, but also in one city or one even neighborhood, you can have many different sorts of worlds. Also connecting with local indigenous groups in the Andes, also in Kanganga Guarani in Brazil. So how the modern world connects with frontline indigenous communities and finds common ground is also key. And that's some of the work we try to do in Ecolese as well. In Lisbon, where I live, we're trying to work with this as well, connecting different communities. So there was the Irish Minister for Circular Economy, planting food in a local school where we play Irish football. So Ecolese. It's the European Network of Community-Led Initiatives on Climate Change and Sustainability. It's a network of networks. We have an action platform called Communities for Future, and one of the few projects we worked on, the Urbana project, made quite an impact, and we were very happy to be part of that. So there's many groups in this, including Clay, Drift, which many of you are from, are part of the Ecolese network. I'm part of Cool, the Science University. So it's a process to try to better enable communication between these different groups that are already active, but then also see about how to make change within the system to advocacy work within the European Union. So people are coming together offline and online, working with Slack, communication tools for better efficient communications, building wikis, having academic outputs about what is the current state of community-led initiatives, policy work, participating in the COPs, but also in the alternative processes with the social movements, and trying to act as bridges between all these different levels, inside, outside. 6 years of having the European Day of Sustainable Communities, an invitation for local communities to put on events to show what's going on, what people are doing, what strategies they're doing, and try to further connect the network. Also being part of some projects like Transform the Cities, which works globally with a few other partners, trying to see what's out there. And that's part of this network approach, trying to offer an invitation to participate, but also reach out to others. The Urbana project, very much Ecolese-led project. 3 of the partners were also part of the Ecolese network. We had 4 moments to discuss various aspects of how to make sustainable and just cities. Also this hybrid affair, how we can, and this was before COVID, how we can facilitate offline and online in the most efficient and fair way for greatest participation, and using the tech tools that we have. Then also in Lisbon, we worked on a micro level, bringing people together, working with the housing crisis, the eviction crisis that's on, dealing with that, trying to deal with it, trying to bring in the actors, and trying to look at how we can move forward. Also, the use of artistic process is very much a key tool in us communicating together. Translocal can also be in the city. Marvila, Ajuda, and Bella Flor, 3 places, trying to connect them was a translocal challenge. Bringing people in to share their stories, their voices, their different views, building the wiki, outputs of what's gone on, trying to make things accessible. So it's not lost in academia, but it appears in blog world, in more accessible language as well, podcasts. Also then some of the crew there in JUSTRA doing really lovely film nights and things like that, which is very playful, but bringing communities together to share moments together, to deepen this discussion and make it go maybe a bit deeper. And then also doing stuff outside the normal world that we built, like outside our own communities, going to other communities and trying to bring in other groups that are similar, but still not talking together, like, for example, degrowth and transition. So one of the outputs of our BANA, we had these 17 keys to try to unlock, that anybody can use to try to unlock the doors to open up and allow the flow of these just and sustainable cities. The Urbana project moved forward thanks to Bosch funding. So we've now got 9 experimental groups exploring this theme for another few months. We've got a space for people to try to share. And I think this is key. Where are we discussing things? How are we discussing things? I think we need to go way further. Maybe we've become a bit too reliant on the social media, which is, corporate owned, et cetera, et cetera. So there is no planet B. We have a lot of challenges. We can do it if we really get organized. Community, I feel, is key. That's why I put my energy into things like this, so we can have these moments, because if you're not loving the process that you're involved in, you're going to go nowhere. So that's really the key to being part of a community. So thank you very much. Hopefully that was quick enough. And I'll just stop sharing.
Wow, Duncan. Yes, that was quick and lots of information. Thank you very much. Really nice narrative that you shared. Also applause. Thanks. We're a bit behind schedule, but I think that's completely okay, since we heard really interesting stories being shared, insights. So this is about this discussion. We still have 20 minutes discussion. We go ahead with that time. The idea is that you either raise hands or you have already put something into the chat.
What are reference groups and how are they organized and facilitated?
Thanks so much for that question, Philip. So each reference group works differently. For instance, the built environment reference group, like that I mentioned first, is convened by us. So we've got a program manager who manages the Inclusive Cities program, but they've also got a research associate that helps them with the facilitation of that. So they organize the learning events, the meetings, and the engagements that happen, but the topics for discussion are brought forward by the city officials themselves. So what they want to discuss per engagement, per meeting, or per learning event is really directed by them. And that particular one is funded by us. So we've got some funding that's directed to that. For instance, the City Water Managers Forum, that has actually now transitioned to become the Water Resilient Cities learning event. So in the beginning, it was just city managers who convened, and they were the ones that managed their interactions. They scheduled their own meetings and all of that. But over the years, it has now transitioned to be a Water Resilient Cities event or learning platform. And that is convened by different partners. So we've got the GIZ, the German Development Agency. We've got USAID, the WASHFIN program of USAID. We've got ourselves as the South African Cities Network as the core partners, and the South African Local Government Association as the core partners that co-convene the learning exchange or the learning platform. But for each learning event that we have, we are periodically joined by different partners. So for one learning event, would be joined by C40 cities who would have a particular area of focus that they would like to share or exchange with cities on. Sometimes you get the World Resources Institute, the WRI, they're doing urban resilience work, urban water resilience work in the region. So they periodically join us. So it's different configurations for the different networks. The energy one is co-convened by ourselves, an organization called Sustainable Energy Africa, and then the South African Local Government Association. And we as the three partners then fund and co-convene these learning events. But with that as well, it's the city practitioners that determine what it is that they would like to exchange on. Thanks so much. For Duncan, I found it quite interesting, the different configurations that exist. And I was interested to see that there's also gentrification and evictions happening in European cities, which I thought would be in the global south predominantly. How has that changed the activation of residents, of citizens who perhaps wouldn't normally be interested in the urban, in what happens in their spaces, or aware of what is happening? How has that changed people's awareness of the issues that need to be advocated for, and how are communities then getting together to address those challenges?
Thanks, Liti Boho. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. Well, if I go back just in a bit, it was kind of quick over many things, but the situation in Barcelona after 2008, when the economic crisis hit, was very extreme, and many people were hit very, very quick. There would have been activists and pretty strong political groups at that time that were aware and engaged, but many people weren't. They were just normal people affected by the crisis, suffering quickly and having to adapt. People lost their houses, people were being evicted, old people who'd gone by the system, were literally jumping out of their buildings, committing suicide while the police were coming to evict them. It was that extreme. So there was many evictions going on at the time. How it changed was that people really sparked by the more radical end, the occupation of the squares, normal people, if we call them that, came to the process going, what are these crazy people going on about? But then what they were talking about, and this happened in the public realm, which is important, they could identify what was being said. And they said, they're talking about my reality. They're talking about somebody I know, somebody who's been affected by this economic crisis. So very quickly, they were like, oh, interested, but kind of still from afar. But then quickly, people had come behind them and thought that they were part of the crew. So this was a very interesting dynamic because it quickly changed. And as the occupation started to grow, it happened in other places. And then quickly, we saw a real change happen where the dialogue started to happen and the anger grew, but also the sense of we can change this, we will change this. And this led to, it was about a 4-year process, but where the organized groups like PA, the platform of those affected by the mortgage, really led a lot of the local struggles and eventually ran for local elections only at the municipal level, not at national state level, and other citizen groups in other cities, and they won elections in 8 of the main cities of Spain, Madrid, Barcelona, and some others. And they kind of took control of the infrastructure of the municipality and try to open it up and allow greater participation. So bringing it out of those closed spaces into, like I showed you, the picture of people having a discussion in a local square. So it was open there was an invitation for people to participate, but because lots of communities and people had become very politicized very quickly, there was a high participation level. So it wasn't all perfect. There was lots of problems. There was, difficult decisions to be made, et cetera, et cetera. But my perspective, the idea that normal citizens who in the past weren't participating in the process became very much participants in the process, and their voice was being heard in shaping what sort of future do they want locally. And then from that was at the Spanish level. Then from that, they said, we need to do this with every city in the world. So they created the Fearless Cities Network, and now that's gone to different places. And we've on every continent, there's groups active in that network. So that's a quick response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That's quite interesting. And then I have one last question for Corinna. With the housing cooperatives, if I may call them that, who owns the land where the housing establishments are? Because in our context, there's a whole issue around land ownership. And people don't have access to land to build their own houses. It's either municipal owned or private land, and private land is usually historically in the white community, and getting that, and it's quite expensive to access land that's affordable, that's even close to economic centers. So I'd be interested to find out in your context and in the areas that you work in, or where the housing cooperatives are, what are the land ownership dynamics there, and how are those resolved?
Yeah, thank you for your question. There are different models existing in many countries, I would say. There are cooperatives that own the land themselves. This is quite usual, I would say so. And of course, what is also necessary to say that there are very many types of cooperatives also. So this is not always a solution, let's say. So it because there are also home ownership oriented cooperatives existing. So this just a remark at the side. An interesting solution then is the community land trusts, because there in this case is usually the land is in the hand of the trust, and the houses, the homes are either owned by the residents, or they rent them. So there are more models, but this is the usual case, let's say. And yeah, I would say this problem is somehow everywhere existing, what you're mentioning, that well, in the case if it's municipal land, somehow it's sometimes easier to convince them to provide this land at a long-term lease, for instance. This is existing in Germany, for instance. But there's I'm thinking of a community land trust example from Puerto Rico, which might be interesting for you, because in this case people were able to buy the land and include it into this community land trust. Yeah, so land is unfortunately everywhere a huge issue, because of the price and access to it.
All right, no, thanks for that. And yeah, not really comforting, but at least we're not the only ones.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you for the questions and the answers.
If you are not loving the process that you're a part of, then you're not going anywhere. What are some of the most important ways that translocal networks enable processes that people love?
Quickly, the place is important. So going somewhere which is maybe so different and amazing, like a global eco village, can be so profound. Where it is, the sense, the spirit that's there, it's really quite moving. But as well, the processes that are often in place, if you're able to be connected in and brought in to participate in some of these processes, you see the level of care, of openness, of truthfulness that exists at times, especially in tough moments. And then from our own some of the work we do with walking tours, we try to really connect deeper with our local territory, be it along a kind of derelict river basin, for example, connecting with people who live around there, trying to bring people for a walk and walk it together. And that itself can be quite an interesting and different way to kind of look at the place that is considered, you know, a no man's land or something like that.
Tobin or Dittibo, would you also like to chip in on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Flora. That's a nice and interesting question. I would say very simply, kind of simple answer is to meet each other physically. Is all. I have the impression is always in the end the best and most efficient way. But also, of course, also other ways of interaction. I, for instance, I like very much my the MOBA case I talked about is a very interesting case, because it's very special what they're trying to do. They're all coming from countries with where no cooperatives or kind of rental or affordable types of housing are existing, and building that up from scratch, and building on the idea of creating a fund altogether, yeah, seems kind of utopistic, I would say. But they meet each other, they understand each other very well, as I saw, and I think that can work, and they have support from outside, as I said, from NGOs that bring them to other events where they meet other people, and yeah, this is kind of interesting to see. And the similar thing I'm observing the community land trust, because for instance, in Germany, it's they also try to set it up. It doesn't exist yet, and they are also interesting and very sympathetic links to groups existing in the US, and supporting them, and yeah, celebrating like this World CLT Day together, and creating a new sense of belonging, which, well, of course, Duncan knows a lot about. I think this kind of coming together, and yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. I have maybe one more question if there's, I don't see any other coming up. At least to Corinna, and also I think heard it back at Duncan, but I think also Little Bo is touching upon this. What is this bridging function that you have been referring to for the networks? It would be great to just get each of you speaking one more time about what do you see is the importance there for getting our societies to be more just and sustainable, that we use these bridging functions that networks can offer. Shall we start with Corinna and go Little Bo and Duncan before we close?
Yeah, first of all, we, as most of you might know, we can differentiate different forms of social capital. So we have bonding capital, bridging capital, and linking capital, and it is, well, bonding up capital, of course, is very important and interesting, particularly at the local level. But as I see in my research, also, if there is a strong connection at international level, and a strong kind of transnational identity or belonging, this kind of bonding also works translocally, and bridging opens the opportunity to other resources by linking people to more heterogeneous groups. So groups with different forms of capital, which is very important, be it knowledge, be it money, and so on. So and we can, I could see this practically in every case. People who, well, the initiatives themselves, so who manage to bridge to other groups, but also by the help of intermediaries, let's say, bridging to foundations that are able to provide huge funds, for instance. So it's not a well, maybe I let the other ones talk as well. Sorry.
Thanks, thanks, Corinna. I think for us, it's about, and Philip just mentioned that around brokering knowledge, but for us, it's around brokering partnerships between different urban actors, between different sets of communities within the urban space, whether it's private sector, whether it's civil society organizations with cities, and facilitating the conversations to happen, and being a sort of neutral organization that's not politically linked, that doesn't, well, we have a vested interest to making sure that our cities work, but we don't have any sort of vested interest in seeing one or the other thrive or function better than one. So we have that sort of luxury of being the interface between these different urban actors. And for our cities themselves, if we look internally within our cities, it's about bridging the silos that exist within the different departments that exist in cities. So each department will have its own budget, its own strategies and policies, its own KPIs. And if they achieved, then they achieved, but not realizing that it impacts on others. And so that transversality or that bridging between the different silos that exist in cities is quite important for us. And then externally looking at how do you enable a city to work with the private sector, for instance, around solution making. If there's a solution that exists out there, how does and it's something that cities always say, oh, our supply chain management won't allow us to do that because now it's like an unsolicited bid, etc., etc. How do you make those kinds of solutions possible within the reality that exists in our cities? So it's around brokering partnerships externally, but also internally inward looking. How do you make sure that different departments work together to achieve what they need to? Thanks.
Yeah, and from our side, well, from Ecolese, Ecolese is a European-based network, but some of its sub-networks are global. But as well, we're very much part of the climate justice movement or movements. So I think the bridging is key because one, it's reaching out to those others in other areas or bits, but have different perspectives or viewpoints or have come from different worlds, trying to understand very much the different worlds that people have come from, different communities. And I think a lot of it is not just about, for example, getting all of them to come to our thing, but it's like we go to all those other places and things and communities. And if that means turn up in a community hall one day and talking to government minister the next time, turning up, understanding, making the connections, and see now you can act as the bridge between these different groups, both at the diversity of languages or place, but also at scales, from talking from something super local to something wider. And on a very personal level, I think it's trying to go with where you're coming from. You have your objectives or your pathway or whatever, but going to somewhere like, let's say, a housing group, which isn't very climate justice, but trying to find where do we have common ground? How can our toolkit assess them to go forward and reach their objectives? And how can we find routes in common to go forward? So that's part of the challenge, is always thinking out of the box and going further and deeper. And it's not easy. And lastly as well, chance to go something diverse, learn. Maybe it's a new dance, maybe it's something, whatever, new food, whatever. But it's a chance to grow and to really be touched by being even deeper in these movements.
Right, thanks, Duncan. These are really nice last words for the panel. Going for a dance. Yeah, I would like to close the panel round with this and let us into a short bio break. Some of you might need to go. I saw that already in the chat. Those who stay will be going into the Wikiton in about 5 minutes. So yeah, hope to see you back then.
If everyone's back, we're not a lot anymore, but that might be nice. I think we'd planned to do this all in breakout groups, but I think we can just keep this plenary. I'll just give a quick overview of what the workshop looks like, and then we can start wikiing. So what's the purpose of a Wikiton is to collectively either create or edit pages of initiatives or anything that we're familiar with. In this case, we're going to focus on creation. The idea is to, if you're a part of a network or you're familiar with a network or you're curious about one, to just fill in the information form on the wiki and collectively build up the knowledge and the capacity to inspire everyone else, all of the initiatives that want to learn from other initiatives or that are trying to inspire and set up spaces or to connect with each other. So the flow of the event, of the workshop, is first of all to introduce each other, but I think we're such a small group that that's almost not necessary anymore. And then exchange the networks you're going to work on, and then just start wikiing. I'll quickly show how to do this practically. There was a video that was shared with the announcements for the event, so I'll keep this very brief. Logging in. On the wiki page, there's a login button. If you have an account already, it's best to use that. If not, we have a guest account. Alexi will be sharing this, the credentials in the chat, so you can just copy paste them and use this to create pages. To fill in the form, on the page, you see on the left-hand side a Wikiton form. If you click on that, you're sent to this page, which in which you can just type in the name of the network you want to fill the page out of. And then you come to this, and then you can start describing and talking about the initiative. We have a few categories of topics to talk about or to fill in that we're curious about, but there's also a free text option at the bottom where you can just talk about anything or mention anything that you know about the initiative that you think is relevant or that you would like more of as well. If you have any research questions or anything that you're particularly interested in related to a certain network, you're also welcome to fill that in. Then if you have saved the page and you think of something else that you want to add to it, you can click the edit with form button, which sends you back to this page, and always remember to save. We had intended breakout rooms, but that's okay. We will just be doing this plenarily. And the hosting team is here for any questions that you have regarding this whole process. I went through this quite fast now, so if you want to just see again how this works, then we can just replay this. So let's start wikiing. So this category page shows what the intention is with this database of translocal networks. The intention of having it being an open source co-creative process where everyone and anyone can add links to this. This will be moderated in case people think to do funny things with it. And we will also go through the submissions that we all did today to see if there's problems, for instance, with links and everything. But we can see that already with just a few of us, we've already created quite some entries. I think there were maybe 4 or 5 when we started, and so now we've tripled or quadrupled it already, which is good work. So I see the Clean Cities Coalition Network in the US, and Energy Cities, European Network of Living Labs, Fire Adapted Communities, Learning Network, Global Eco Village Network, the Impact Hub, La Via Campesina, Mietshausen Syndicat, MOBA Housing, SCE, the Network for Greening the Financial System. That sounds beautiful, like a beautiful one. The Reamp Network, Scientists for Future, Slow Food, the South African Cities Network, a test page, the Sustainable Food Places, Transformative Cities, and Vrijkoop, which is also one of the social housing or the collaborative housing initiatives, if I'm correct. This is good. And I think this will keep growing in the coming time. We will do so ourselves, but I think also if everyone here continues to work on it and shares it with everyone that they think could benefit from participating in this or from the information that it holds, then this will hopefully become a really solid overview of translocal networks that everyone can draw inspiration and learnings from. I'll give the floor to Julia.
I'm going to hand it over straight away. No, first of all, thanks for all the inputs. But I think that's kind of the keyword for Mena, to start just giving us an impression of our discussions today that she has harvested before we come.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Coming out of my silent bubble. I'm gonna share my screen with you to the visual as it is now. Can you all see this? Okay.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Thank you. Let me see where to start. So I'm going to start at the end because this is going to draw your attention, which is that because you were all silent during the Wikithon, I just decided to draw all of you. So everyone is here, at least everyone who was at the Wikithon, and also the speakers, of course, throughout the visual. All right, so at the top of this sphere, you can see what I took from the 3 talks. And I mean, first of all, thank you all for giving the talks. It was really fascinating. And as always, I've had trouble choosing. What else is there to say? Oh yeah, and then here in this corner, there's some of the panel discussion where I've already drawn someone who is taking a little walk to get to know the environment, which I wrote with an I, and I'm going to correct that later. And then here is the Wikithon we just had with a few of the entries that I picked up. And all I'm going to do now, or at least I'm going to do that tomorrow or the day after, is finish it. So there's a few quotes here that I want to make drawings for, because there's a lot of fascinating stuff, and I'm really looking forward to finishing that up. And yeah, thank you guys for having me. It was great.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rena. It's always nice to see what's being picked up and put together in such a nice overview. Really nice. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So I guess the last thing I would like to just share is stay connected. Yes, to get the bridging going or continuing the bridging. And we have another upcoming event for those interested in mobility on justice in motion, mobility justice in mobility justice on the 7th of December. So if you're interested, join us again or share the word. Yes, it's in the chat as well, the link. Okay. And other than that, just rest me to say thank you very much. I enjoyed it to have these conversations with you. Looking forward to continuing them. Thank you.